Sharon Wood was a leading climber in the late 1970s and the 1980s with notable ascents here in the Canadian Rockies, in South America, and in the Himalaya. She achieved great fame in 1986 when she became the first North American woman to summit Mount Everest. I recorded this interview with Sharon at her home here in Canmore on November 12th, 1996.
I first put a rope on when I was 12 years old, and on a mountain called Sky Pilot, just outside of Vancouver. And fortunately, I had a dad that was a real avid outdoors person. He did a lot of skiing and hiking. And so we did our first rope descent when I was 12, and that was probably the highlight of my life up until then. My highlight experience there at Outward Bound was climbing with Laurie one day. He took us out rock climbing, and he took the two of us who showed real enthusiasm alone. And that was a real special treat. And that was definitely, that was a turning point for me. I really wanted to do what Laurie was doing for a living. My wintertime work was working at ski hills. Mostly as a lift operator, because I was too young to be taken seriously for anything else. And I was at Grouse Mountain the winter of 75, 76, when one day someone came and visited me at my lift shack and started talking about this summer camp that took kids climbing, taught kids how to climb, rock climb. And I had already bought my ticket to Australia. I was going to go and work for Ski Hill there. I was going to go to Australia for the summer. But when I heard about this summer camp, my ears pricked up, and I thought I should find out how to get a job there. So I filled out an application and heard back from them within days because they were desperate to find women who could teach climbing. And I went to work for them, and the summer camp turned out to be Camp Chief Hector. There were a whole bunch of kids my age, in their late teens, that were aspiring climbers that were bumbling around in the mountains at the same level as me. There was Dwayne, and there was Dave McNabb, and people like that. And we really grew up together at that camp. Wilderness One was very much a camping program in the mountains before we got there, but because there were so many aspiring climbers that were getting involved in this program, it became more and more and more technical. And we pushed the edge in terms of where we took these kids and the kind of terrain we took the kids. And in fact, the following summer in 77, we launched the first technical climbing program for adults. I certainly met some of my best climbing partners at what became the Muskin Mountain School. There were a number of turning points which really, really altered or enhanced the path, I guess. But Logan came along. I was stuck at Manning Park for the winter, trying to eke out a living as a lift operator, and it's a really depressing place. And I got a letter. It was the winter of 77, January or so. I got a letter from Laurie Screffel, and he said that his girlfriend Lorraine Drews and a few other girls were trying to put together a group of women to go to Logan, and would I be interested? And I was so excited. I just couldn't believe I was being invited to go on an expedition. And I immediately quit my job and went to Calgary and spent the rest of the winter in Calgary preparing with these women and getting ready. What was so funny though, or what was, and a bit alarming, was that I discovered that I was one of the women with perhaps the most technical experience. And that wasn't a lot. That was the alarming part. I climbed Robson, the cane face of Robson the year before, and maybe one or two other pretty straightforward climbs, mountaineering climbs. And so we were definitely all in very much a learning position. We were all very inexperienced. I realized that these women had spent most of the time, they had very much climbed with their boyfriends. And so had I. And so all of a sudden here we were out there, but there was no fairy godmother behind us, making sure that if we made the wrong bearing, that they'd straighten us out. We took the wrong bearing, you know. And that was very enlightening. And it had a very strong impact in terms of how I chose my partners in the future. And I was not, I didn't need to climb with women. I did not need to climb with women. I realized I needed to climb with people that I really, really enjoyed being with. I made a very conscious decision at the age of about 15 that I wanted to pursue my physical abilities when I felt I was in my physical prime, when I felt I was in my strongest years. And so I first went towards skiing, but was very, very strongly drawn to the mountains. And that's why I didn't pursue an education. I went back once and then was quickly abducted by some friends back to the mountains. And so there was never, ever any dilemma there for me. And I wanted to pursue that intensity and get on more serious hills, serious mountains that would, you know, almost impose that intensity. But I wanted it very much. Well, I loved ice climbing, and I went in, you know, what a great backyard. Canadian Rockies, and there I learned how to stay warm when it was cold, and I learned how to stay calm when it was scary, and little waterfalls, you know, I felt just incredibly good training. And I met John, well, John Laughlin certainly inspired more ambition and higher standards as well, I would say. Because he wanted to go to Everest, and all these things coincide, or kind of overlap at different times, but John had quite a rigid training regime when he lived in Calgary, and I really enjoyed climbing with John and was caught up with his ambition and boldness as well. So he definitely turned my head towards the Himalayas. And the fact that he was going to Everest in '82, it made me think that I'd like to go at some time as well. Yeah. And when I watched my peers, these guys that I climbed with, go to Everest in '82, I felt a bit funny about that. I thought, well, why am I not along? And at the time I felt I could answer that pretty easily. I felt I didn't have the experience, yet some of my peers didn't have that much more. But for some reason, wasn't very interested in that expedition. There was something about it. But as I followed it, again, that intensity that I could see in the television and the communications going back and forth from Canada to them on Everest, I wanted a piece of that intensity. I wanted to be with those guys sharing those experiences. I started climbing with the Mountain Club boys, really, in the winter of '77. I did some rock climbing before that with them, but really the winter of '77 I started ice climbing, and I was very much, I was considered a protege. And the wonderful thing about men, it seems, is that they feel very, obliged to teach women, you know, and to me I saw this as a tremendous advantage. And I just soaked up everything they wanted to teach me. And very quickly I found that I could move up right beside them. Because I was willing to learn. I had that openness that I feel maybe another man wouldn't have. Maybe a man would have felt that he could do it on his own. But at high altitude, I like to call it the great equalizer, because you see everybody, no matter how strong and how experienced they are, reduced to being completely useless and helpless at times. I realized that we had to look after one another, take care of one another, and I found myself in situations where I did have to take charge. And I very much liked that. I didn't see myself so much as a woman, but as a climbing partner. And that I came back with a lot of confidence, a lot of confidence. And I knew, I'll contradict myself here, but there was always that little nagging voice somewhere in the back of my mind that I wasn't good enough, that maybe I shouldn't be here. Because it did seem like a place first for men,
But that was in your mind more than in their mind.
I don't know.
Was it?
I don't know. I know that I was very surprised, this was years later, when I was trying to get onto the Everest Light team. And now, in 84 or so. And the process to getting onto that team involved speaking pretty well to everyone, winning pretty well everyone on the team onto your side because it was a consensus vote. And talking to a couple of people that I was more familiar with, they mentioned that they were concerned about me as a woman for a couple of reasons. One was because I might mess up the dynamics. Getting wrapped up in a relationship, true enough. Okay? If that was my objective, and I could see it could really mess it up.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was just shocked at this, but I'd had a pretty active track record, and I'd had a lot of fun. I felt that it was pretty unfair since I like to climb as well. Maybe they could just as likely mess up the dynamics.
That's right.
It depends. But definitely, if you introduce another gender into the situation, it can complicate things. And I knew that Jim was very, very protective of this team in terms of he didn't want anything to go wrong. He wanted to reduce the chances or better his odds as best he could, lever his odds as best he could. And so I was seen as a bit of a threat. And so what was really interesting is if I talked to each one of those men face to face, they couldn't possibly say that. And that was the wonderful thing about that process. And so eventually I was invited on the team. A very intense summer was the summer of '85 when we went to, I went to Peru with Carlos. And he was doing some guiding, but he also had some very ambitious objectives. He wanted to do Talirahu, and he wanted to do a couple other climbs. And but first he had some guiding to do. No, we tried to do some guiding, some climbing first, but it was just disastrous. We'd go up to these climbs. We were very good at approaching climbs. We approached a lot of climbs. I can write a book on approaches. And we'd get up to the base of it, and I wouldn't like the conditions, or something in me, mostly me, at least it seemed to be the case, just didn't want to do the climb. Whether it was the conditions or whatever, there was that feeling. That feeling, and sometimes you can't discern whether that feeling is it just, am I just being chicken shit? Am I just being fearful here? Or is there really something in there that is a truth that I should be listening to? But anyway, so we backed off a lot of climbs. You go up all these valleys, and at the ends of these valleys, it's about a 2-day trip usually up with burro and walking, and at the ends of these valleys there are all these magnificent peaks with so many unclimbed lines. It's like being in a candy store except no one else is in there.
Yeah.
But and so I was walking up this valley with Carlos and his client, and I was just planning on trekking around. But as we rounded the corner on the second day, I could see this beautiful face of Takarapu. The sun was just on it, just so. Just a beautiful ice face with a little hourglass section where the ice deepened. And I was immediately swept away by it, just very, very moved by it, by looking at this face, and I knew I had to climb it. And up to this point, I'd been following Carlos's dreams around, and had, experienced this growing aversion to doing these faces for whatever reason it was. And all of a sudden I saw something that became mine, that was solely my feeling. And so we got into camp at 4 o'clock that day, settled in, and I immediately packed up, and I did the approach walk up to the base of this face over a period of 3-4 hours. I slept at the base of the face, and left Carlos and his client down there. And the next morning got up at first light and started climbing the face. And it was such a religious experience for me, because by that time I felt really comfortable on the ice, and it was beautiful ice. It was styrofoam, and it was just, and there was this one unknown that drew me and both repelled me. You know, the unknowns on the route, where you're not sure if you're going to be able to get through it, and you get closer and closer, and the anticipation gets more and more intense. And I came into the hourglass. It wasn't that long, I don't know, a couple hundred feet maybe, and climbed through the hourglass, and just felt, I felt like, I don't know, superhuman or something. Got to the top of the climb a few hours later. It wasn't a very big face, right? It was maybe 1,800 feet. Got to the top of the climb, or close to the top of the climb, all right? And I was counting on walking off the back, right? Because I assumed the regular route was off the back, and I saw another group coming down the glacier the day before, assuming that, oh good, I'll have their route to walk off. But I get to the summit ridge, where it steepens and becomes pretty knife edge. And I put one foot on the right, sort of the east side of the ridge, and keep one foot on the south side. And I realized that the east side is just pasted with snow. And I have a really uneasy feeling. I take a couple more steps, and the whole right side just goes. It just collapses under my feet. It slides down. I think, oh my God. And a shot adrenaline sends me up to the peak, you know. I'm just quite tense now. I get to the summit, but all I can think about is how the hell I'm going to get off here, because I can't see any footprints. They didn't make it to the top. So why didn't they make it to the top? Was it the avalanche conditions or what? Like, the snow conditions were really weird that year. And I didn't know where to go, but I just knew that the slope on the other side dropped off on that very nice, sort of a nice hanging pillow of snow, right? And I realized I couldn't go down there. And so I ran around the top of the summit, pacing for about 20 minutes, panicking, trying to decide what to do, and then I realized I was going to have to down climb what I just climbed up. So anyway, I'd never really down climbed that far on that kind of, that degree of ice, and I ended up doing the whole thing, and it was an incredibly intense experience. And I got to the bottom, and I just felt like, I've got to do this again. And everything around me was just calling me. And so I went back down to camp that night, and I was just on cloud nine. I was high as a kite. And Carlos was very, very somber. Very, very upset. And I stuck around that night. The next day we moved up to another camp just up the valley, and this time we were under the east face of Ramapalk, a really pretty face. And a little more technical, a bit of rock, a little more ice, a few more unknowns, and I climbed that face on my own. And I got to the top of it, and again, but this time I knew I had a way off. There were footprints. And I just felt like there was so much passion in me, you know, for doing what I was doing. Like, I knew that this was mine. This was my passion. It was no one else's. It belonged to me. And the only motivation that came was from within, you know. And so those were two of the most significant climbs in my life for no other reason than just sort of a sense of personal, it was the personal satisfaction in them, you know, and the intensity, like every second, you know, everything having to be absolutely right. And you know how, you know, there's just such an intense focus that prevails. So Carlos is devastated, right? And I realize we've just changed that there's been a jump, that I'm no longer his protege. And this is very disturbing because there's a change in the dynamics of the relationship. And he finishes with his client. We go and try chokaraku. I think that's what it's called. We go to the base of it, and it's got all these. If you've seen the runnels, in the classic South American faces, they have these deep, deep runnels, yeah? Well, each one of these runnels, especially the runnel that he wanted to climb, it was some route that had been climbed only by a couple other people, was capped with this ugly, monstrous cornice, yeah? Well, they don't fall off in South America, at least that's what people think, huh? But it's just because there haven't been enough people there to climb them, to get killed by them, right? But they do fall off. And the next morning when we woke up, it was snowing. And I thought, thank God, I didn't want to wait around here. I want to get the heck out of here. So we walked out of the valley, but on our way out, we saw this face. The northeast face of Huascaran sewer. And Carlos was totally bummed because his life, his happiness hinged on whether he got up something and how hard it was. His whole life was climbing. And he was so bummed out. But we sat down on this moraine and we began to look at this face and study this face. And I wanted to go up there. This was a route that hadn't been done before, and he didn't pick it. But, you know, and we both began to get excited about this, though. It was a shared objective this time. It was shared, like, and it was pepper black, right? And you could hear the rocks. This was midday. You could hear the rocks screaming down there, and it was a big face. I don't know how many feet it was, but Huascaran Sur is a big mountain. Eh? And we began to pick out a route. We found a route that we thought would go. And if we applied the right strategy, if we only climbed in the dark or in the coldest hours of the day, we thought we could get up it in relative safety. And so we went back and we were very excited now. This was, although there was a great deal of uncertainty, we were very excited. We packed up. We came back to the face a few days later, and we'd given ourselves 2 days to approach it. Well, it only took us half a day to approach it. And we were so excited, I was so excited, that we started climbing the face. We just threw the strategy out the window because we were there, you know, we were on this mountain, and the closer we got to this route, the better it looked. And we started climbing up it, and the bottom part, unfortunately, it's a beautiful ice face, but it serves as a funnel for the whole northeast face of this mountain. And we got up a couple pitches. Carlos climbed into a bergschrund and belayed me out of the bergschrund onto the steepest part where it narrowed of the ice funnel. And I was up, got to the top of the pitch, 150 feet up, and I just got one screw in, was setting an anchor, had just clipped onto one screw when I heard that sound. You know the sound of these missiles falling through the air from a very, very high place. And I just started, it just started pelting down. And before I knew it, I was hit so hard, I was thrown backwards off my feet and slammed against the face. And my shoulder was completely numb. And after the initial assault was over, I screamed down to Carlos and said, I've got to get out of here. And I was able to lower down because I was on double ropes, left my anchors in, got into the bergschrund. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and his face just fell, you know, because he knew the climb was over. I was injured. I couldn't move my arm. I couldn't move it. And we had to stay there that night because I couldn't move. I was in shock. And he was, we thought, well, let's just see how it feels tomorrow morning. It might just be bruised. And so the next morning, I could move my arm a little bit, yeah? And I thought, oh God, I can't let him down on this one. He'll think there's really something wrong here. And so almost out of peer pressure or some kind of weird pressure, we decided to do it. And he led that day. And I could lift my arm this high. and place my tool, yeah? And most of it was all ice, and so it was very easy, no problem. I could do that. And by the end of that day, we weren't going down. And so we were on the face for another 2 days as we got into through the rock bands up on a ridge, which turned out to be the East Ridge in the Spanish route. And it's a ridge that goes on forever. It has these horrendous hanging cornices and things that want to fall off. And that bottomless sugar smell. And we finally got to the summit. We'd been out of food for a day and climbed down the other side. We missed our flight, right, because we were over time. And it wasn't until I got back to Canada and I couldn't put my arm above my head. You know, I kept having to walk my fingers up when I was guiding on the rock because I couldn't lift my arm. I realized I should better go to the doctor. And it turns out that I'd broken my shoulder, broken the acromion bone in my shoulder, and I realized, gosh, you know, if I can do that, I can do anything. I'm ready to do anything. And that was that whole summer in terms of the solo climbs and that. And the Ancash face, which is what we did, a new scent on the Ancash face. The only scent on the Ancash face. That just pushed me into a whole new world in terms of realm of confidence and readiness.
Maybe you could tell me about Everest 86.
On the climb, I was very concerned how I fit in, because in the beginning people were paired up, and I was one of the last people that was supposed to climb on the mountain, even though it was very much he had a roster set up where everyone would eventually be working on the mountain and leading on the mountain. I just thought, is there some of this stuff coming back to me now? A real turning point for me on that climb is when I finally started fixing on the mountain. To me, that's what I love to do. I hate who doesn't hate load carrying? And that was probably a couple of weeks into the trip. Yeah. And when I started fixing, we could put out ropes very quickly because it was so easy.
Yeah. Who were you climbing with?
Well, that was the problem. You see, I couldn't keep partners very long. They were either I'd get who was left over from another partnership, or Laurie. I was partners with Laurie for a while. I was partners with Dan. He got sick, so he was out of there. And then I was partners with Laurie, and he got sick, and he was out of there. And eventually I ended up most of the time with good old Albie, you know. Yeah. And Albie and I worked really well together. We were really well paced, and he's just great to be with. He has a great sense of humor. And he has a great attitude, and he's just steady as can be. So most of the time I ended up with Albie in the end, and I liked the stability, because up till then it seemed like other people were partnered up, and I wasn't. Mm-hmm. I felt like a bit of a freak in a way. Yeah. And the higher we got on the mountain, the stronger I got, and the more people thinned out, began thinning out. We came to a real turning point where we were running out of time, and the weather was getting increasingly worse. And we had to make a decision whether to continue on the West Ridge or go off onto the North Face. And of course, the whole time, I was a strong proponent of the Hornbein Couloir. And there was quite a division in the team at that time. And I remember Barry, it might have been Kevin, I can't remember who else, maybe James, all saying that they would rather fail doing the route that they started out doing than opt for an easier one, or opt for a lesser one. To me, I figured just about anything on that side of the mountain would not be walk-up. And that was a real potential point of division. I'm not sure how we got through that one, but I think Jim helped guide us through. He had the faith, the confidence, and the trust of pretty well everyone. That's what was so different about this team, I think, is Jim was the moderator for a lot of these you know, it is so intense, and there were blow-ups, and there were disagreements at times, but Jim would always seem to be able to moderate them. And finally, I think one point became pretty clear is that we would fail trying if we stayed on the West Ridge, and that there were, in the end, only 4 of us left that were potential summit material, that had all the pieces left to at least try for it. And so, and Barry came around very well, because I think he was one of the strongest opponents for that idea. And he supported us big time. And another difficult point came when, amongst the 4 of us, we had to decide who was to go up first, who was the first summit bid team. And I was just coming to the top of that hump, you know what I mean, the hump where you've been on the mountain long enough, you're as acclimatized as you're going to get, you're as keen as you're going to get, and you're just starting to go down the other side. And so much of it is the psychological. And Lori and Jim suggested that I go first with Dwayne, which didn't make any sense to me. I had just been up high. I had just been fixing ropes between 5 and 6. I needed a rest. And that would hold the team up more, because Dwayne and Barry had already been down at the bottom resting. Dwayne and Barry was, I'm sorry, I'm making this very clear.
No, this is great.
There was, in the end, the 4 left were Albie, Barry, Dwayne, and myself. Albie and I were a team. Barry and Dwayne were a team. And it made complete and total sense that since Dwayne and Barry were down resting first, they go up first. And when Jim and Lori suggested other and strongly pushed it, I said initially at the first meeting, no. That doesn't make any sense. I'll go on the second bid. And I felt the chances of getting up on the second bid were just as good, really, except I was concerned about the waiting period, because I was losing it a bit. And Jim came up to me at the end of the day after we decided that, and carried on and talked about how we would support Barry and Albie, or Barry and Dwayne. And I felt awful. I felt like I'd lost it. Like I'd really given the only chance that I had away. There was a sense that there wouldn't be a second bid. And Jim came to me and said, look, Woody, you know, if you really want to get up this mountain, I would go now. He said, look, Annie Whitehouse was going at the same time on the American team. Annie had a great chance of getting up there with Todd Bibber. She'd been on the mountain before. She'd been in the Hornbeam Couloir just 2 years earlier, turned around at the crux. And he said, what's the difference between Americans and Canadians? And he said, Americans are always first. Here's your chance to make a difference. Go for it. Go for it. This is your chance. So I immediately got out of the tent, went straight to Barry's tent, said, Barry, look, I've had a change of mind here. Would you be willing to trade me spots? I would really like to try this with Dwayne. Barry said, Woody, I'll be here to August if that's what it takes. So I said, great. I'm out of here. So we quickly shifted the strategy around, and Dwayne and myself, supported by Barry, Kevin, and James, started up the face, and we skipped a camp. First day we went from Camp 2 to Camp 4, which was a 5,000 foot ascent up to 24,000 feet. We were going to try and do it spend as little time up high as possible. The next day we went over to 5. We lost James on the way. He just hit the ceiling. We still had Kevin and Barry, and it's funny because Kevin and I were very much in an adversarial kind of situation. He's just really intense in a very different way that I'm really intense, and if either one of us lost it, I think Kevin would have taken the spot, would have been ready to fill the spot. There was some interesting stuff going on there. But in the way that Kevin was adversarial really motivated me to keep going in terms of some of the things that he did. There were times when I wanted to turn around because it just seemed like it was hopeless. And he pushed us on. You know, he was the support team and he pushed us on. I have a lot of thanks going to him. Anyway, we got up to Camp 6. The ropes stopped well before Camp 6. We nearly lost it, actually. At the end of the day, just below Camp 6, we were at the bottom of the Combine Couloir, right? It's this funnel, right? For the whole, I love these funnels. And Barry and I were waiting there for Kevin and Dwayne to catch up, just at the base of the couloir. And I was trying to distract myself, just sorting out this 400 feet of Kevlar line. You know, it's 5mm line. And I was so engrossed in this, so caught up in that, and the next thing I heard was this muffled cry from Barry, and had time, just enough time to look up to see rocks the size of bread boxes coming straight for us. And we were both attached to this anchor. We had a fair lead, but all we had time to do was hit the deck and hope for the best. I thought, this isn't going to work. We're out here. We're going to die in this thing. This is stupid. It's a stupid route. Anyway, we carried on to Camp 6, and Barry and Kevin left us there, but Kevin had given everything he had to get us there. And Dwayne and I went on to the summit the next day.
Yeah. And what strikes me about your summit climb is what motivated you to go on and get there at 9 o'clock at night. I mean, nobody, well, not nobody, obvious, but very few climbers would be that
Stupid.
I suppose. I mean, to risk bivouacking at maybe 29,000 feet, climbing down in the dark as you ended up doing, that incredibly bold. Yeah, I mean, that's great. Like Jim said, you know, it's the sort of thing Americans might do, but Canadians would be sort of more cautious, and you weren't. That was tremendous.
Well, we were such bumblers up to that point, you know. I mean, we didn't get out of the tent till 9 o'clock in the morning. We were so out of it. And I think it was, the real turning point for us was how well we did on the yellow band. It went so well, and it went so easily. And I realized this is just like home. We're at home here. This is rotten rock. Rotten rock mixed with a bit of snow and ice. And what I realized too is that we've done all this before. We may not have been at this altitude, but how many times have you come off a climb with a headlamp? How many times have you gone over really technical terrain with a headlamp? Descended down waterfalls with headlamps, yeah? In really cold conditions. And I think the only thing that drove, I better not speak for Dwayne, but what drove me on was intuition. You know, the weather was only getting better. You know, at 7 o'clock at night, the wind had pretty well died. Whereas, you know, at the beginning of the day, I don't know what Laurie was estimating it to be, but around 100 kilometers, 100 some odd kilometers an hour. You know, so the wind died, the sun was on the ridge. I mean, it was just, hey, this is ours to have. Coming down though it was incredibly scary. It was like being on the moon with no support. You know, we knew that we were going to be out of oxygen. We'd only had a bottle, and we'd only turned it on sort of for the most difficult, the most technical sections, in hopes that we would have someone we really needed it later on the way down. So, but on the way down I was scared. And I did something that I don't feel great about. Although Dwayne doesn't seem to be fazed by it, but I keep trying to get him to talk about it, and he won't talk to me about it. Or he says it's no big deal, but Dwayne was moving a lot slower than I was on the way down. Dwayne is just that kind of guy. He's super careful and super methodical, and that's why he's alive, right? And fortunately, a bit of that rubbed off on me. But there were no ropes, huh? There were only ropes on the top rock band off the summit, and then there was about 300 feet of rope through the yellow band. But other than that, there were no ropes, so we were just climbing backwards down this thing, all the way down.
Yeah.
And you know how it is when you've got your headlamp, you're in this 3-foot, your whole world is this 2-foot sphere of light ahead of you, and everything is counting on just putting the next foot and the next tool in the right place. Then I just become engrossed in this world of my own, and I would lose track of Dwayne, and then I'd stop and I'd wait for him to come down. And we did this all the way down to the ropes. And the ropes, he said, "Oh, go ahead, I'll see you down there." So I descended down the ropes. We had to go one at a time anyway, 5 mil, oh God, 5 mil Kevlar. And I stopped at the bottom of the couloir and decided I better get through the bottleneck and then I'll wait there. And I waited at the bottom of the bottleneck, which was just below the ropes, and he didn't come. And he didn't come. And I started hallucinating. I started, you know, those really wonderfully vivid hallucinations you can have up high where the whole thing plays itself out, where you see the lamp coming and Dwayne's there, and it's like, and then you move on, right? And then I wake up and I realize I'm falling asleep and I'm standing up and I got to get the hell out of here. And so I start to lose. I even think that maybe he's gone ahead. Maybe somehow I'm losing my mind and he's ahead of me. So anyway, I carry on down the couloir and I haven't seen Dwayne. And I can't find the tent. I can't find the camp. I think, oh shit, I've passed it and I can't possibly get back up. It's 2 in the morning or something now. You know, it's like hour 16 or 14 or whatever. Doesn't matter. But I'm really losing it. And I just see this glint of a bottle from my lamp, which is getting pretty low now. And I find the camp. I go in there and I'm almost surprised that he's not there. And then I wait the longest hour and a half of my life for Dwayne to show up. But that's the piece that I don't feel. That's the unfinished piece for me. Is what I don't feel good about that. There's all kinds of arguments, and I know Carlos berated me to no end for that, for doing that, for leaving him. Dwayne says, "Well, I told you to go ahead. No big deal." But yeah, part of me thinks sometimes it's just that little extra. You know, on our way up, you know, just hearing the team's voices through the radio was a whole bunch extra for me.
Yeah.
Gave me an incredible amount of strength to go on. But I don't know. It might have made the difference between him not making it and making it. And he ran out of oxygen sooner than I did. Who knows what, I don't know what the heck was happening with those oxygen bottles and when they were on and when they were off.
That's right.
It was so ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't seem like I had any going up.
Yeah.
I think I had a very uneven flow. I think I had more coming down. I don't know.
What was it like when you got to the top? How did you feel when you got to the top?
Well, it's funny. One part of me thought, okay, this is where I should cry. I should be joyfully, I should have tears of joy. And the truth of it is I was emotionally numb and physically spent.
Yeah.
I was like, let's take the top and get the hell out of here. I can't believe this has happened. It's happened. So now let's just stay alive. Because we were way out in the valley.
Oh, sure. It was 9 o'clock at night when you got up there, wasn't it? Yeah. You had about an hour's light left, or maybe less.
Yeah.
Half an hour. Yeah. Maybe we should talk about what your life has become since Everest.
Well, there were some more climbs. There were a couple of climbs that were pretty significant for me in terms of turning points. I went to Peru with James and climbed the Paragould route on the north face of Huascaran Norte. And that was a dream route that we both wanted to do. But I realized that things had changed for me and that I was more scared than I was engaged. And did a wonderful climb with Ward as well, just up House Peak, but realized that it was time to move on. Not because I climbed Everest, but because I wanted to do some other things in life. I wanted to have some kids. But I really did want to experience a whole other dimension of sort of loving and learning and living, and that's certainly what kids offered. And again, there was that intensity, and I found childbirth to be a great science experiment, one of those intense science experiments, kind of like climbing in a way, like once you're there, there's no turning back. That was great. And it's been very hard to, I've often felt threatened by mediocrity. It's very difficult to go from a life of intensity to one that wants to draw you into mediocrity, because the more routine you have in your life, the easier, the better life goes around, I think. And to keep that intensity up, I've explored in new areas now, explored new areas. The public speaking came. For me, it was handed to me. And something that I would have been crazy to not accept. And being a woman in this business at this time of my life, there's probably not a better time to be a woman, because there's no end to the business coming my way. People want women that diversity's in, huh?